some more questions at that
Okay.
time.
I'm ready.
Okay. I'll start it off by saying that my name is Chris Reedy, and I'm doing the interview, and today is September 6, 2007. We'll be talking with Paul Ross today. And I just took the first question, but can you tell us where and when you were born?
Born in Alton, Illinois, May the 10th, 1917.
Okay. And you were a little older than some of the contemporaries that we've introduced
I
and
was
talked to here.
27 and a half years old in flying combat, had a wife and a daughter.
Mhm. Were you enlisted in the Army Air Force before?
No, I graduated from college in 1940, went through ROTC. In 1940, I ended up with a pilot's rating from the Civilian Pilot Training Program. I got a degree in mechanical engineering and aeronautical engineering, and a second lieutenant in the Air Force Reserve, in the Corps of Engineers.
And when, I guess prior to Pearl Harbor, obviously that's the date everyone's, that's significant.
Right.
But prior to Pearl Harbor, did you look at what was going on around the world and get an idea that something was headed our way?
I don't think so. I was working at Curtiss-Wright in St. Louis from June of 40 to July of 42 when I was called to active duty. Mm-hmm. And I was working on Pearl Harbor Day. I remember being announced over the radio.
Was Curtiss-Wright plant, was that an aircraft factory?
Curtiss-Wright was an aircraft factory in St. Louis, Missouri.
Were they, in that factory, were they producing mainly the pursuit planes, the P-36 and P-40?
No. They were building a advanced trainer for the U.S. Air Force, and the AT-9 was the model. And I was working personally on that particular airplane from its inception until it was pretty well in production.
When Pearl Harbor happened, after Pearl Harbor, were you activated for service?
I was called to active duty 2 different times before 42, and Curtis got me off as, quote, essential to civilian industry. And finally, Uncle Sam said, that's enough, you've got to come on active duty.
And when was that?
In July of 42,
okay.
Is when I went on active duty.
Did you know what you would be doing at that point?
I was Corps of Engineers, and I went to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. And as a second lieutenant, we were training engineer troops. And I had a platoon of 44-year-old Italians out of New York City that couldn't speak English, half of them. And when we were working with munitions and bombs and explosives, I started getting a little nervous because half the Italians could speak English and they'd speak in Italian to the other guys. And I figured this wasn't safe, so I joined the glider program.
Okay. The glider program seemed safer than the explosives then.
Yeah, and the glider program fell apart, and I got in pilot training. It fell apart in the part I was in.
What point did you go into the pilot training? What time?
It would have been in early 1943. In the latter part of 42, I was in the glider program at Okmulgee, Oklahoma, and went through primary glider training and got another private license, my second one, and then went into pilot training in early 43 and flew out of Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and half of the people in our group were French officers whose daddies had got them in overseas over here for pilot training. So we had to do PT in French, and none of us were, quote, too happy about this. And about 15 of us in the group were officers. The rest of them were cadets. And we flew the PT-17 at that time.
Was that a multi-engine trainer?
It was a single-engine biplane, PT-17, built by Boeing.
And what point did you make, I guess, either a transition or were you transferred saying he's going to be a bomber pilot?
Uh, when I went through advanced training in Albany, Georgia, we were asked or told what we wanted to do, and I told them I wanted to be a bomber pilot, 4-engine pilot. Most of the guys wanted to be fighter pilots, but I wanted to be a transport pilot because I had dreams of being in commercial aviation later on.
So you were, even then at that point, kind of looking ahead because you were older than
Yes.
the other pilots. Was there anything else that attracted you to bombing, strategic bombing?
I don't think so.
And when did you first start flying the B-24?
It would have been January of '44. I graduated from flying school in the middle of January '44, and then we were transferred to Montgomery, Alabama for B-24 training.
How long were you in that training?
And that training lasted probably a month or maybe a month and a half. And then we went to Springfield, Massachusetts to pick up a crew. And then we took the crew down to Charleston, South Carolina, and flew crew training with the whole crew together. And in July, we went to New York and jumped in a B-24 and flew it overseas with a group of 24s and 17s.
Where did you fly from New York? Did you fly to England?
We flew to Goose Bay, Labrador, the Azores, Marrakech, Africa, then over to Cairo, and then up to Italy. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure what base we landed on in Italy to get rid of our good airplanes, and they put us in trucks and took us down to Saipan and let us fly the old airplanes.
Was that disheartening?
No.
Were you nervous as you got closer to the war zone?
No, I don't think so. While we were at Saipan, the guys that had been flying combat briefed all us new guys on how rough it was and how we were going to get shot up and all that sort of stuff. So we were prepared for the worst situation. And on my first flight, the squadron commander always flew with the pilot to show him how to play the game. And it was a very rough mission, just like the guys said. But the squadron commander was all screwed up and tore up the airplane on landing because the mission wasn't what they were used to.
Do you remember? I'm sorry, do you remember what this mission was?
I don't remember where it went. I presume it went to the Balkans somewhere. Most of the early missions went over to the Balkans. And when the airplane got shot up, the air speed indicator was put out of action. And on the way back to the base, I got down underneath and found out that one of the pipes was broken in two that fits the airspeed indicator. And I took a hose off my main west and hooked the thing together, and the airspeed started working again. And the squadron commander was kind of shook up about this whole thing. And when we landed, he crashed the nose wheel and broke the nose wheel off the airplane.
Did that kind of make you nervous that the squadron commander cracked up a little bit?
No, we found out later that he was really a B-17 pilot. Didn't know much about B-24 in the first place.
Did you ever, I guess, encounter in a rivalry between the B-24 pilots and the 17 pilots?
Not really. Not at that time. I think after the war, we probably talked to some guys that talked about the 17 and how fancy it was and all that, but I wasn't ever impressed.
What can you tell us about your crew?
My crew were all young kids, in their early 20s. My co-pilot was a went through fighter pilot training, but was jerked off and put into a B-24 because they were short of B-24 pilots and they had enough fighter pilots. And that didn't make him very happy. The navigator was out of navigation school, and he was a little on the nervous side, and he was hit by a bomb fragment on one of the early missions, and flak went through his helmet and cut his head. He earned a Purple Heart on that. Later on in his life, he flew with lead airplane one day, which he always wanted to do. The airplane was shot down and he didn't survive. He was the only member of the crew that was wounded, and he was wounded and killed. My bombardier went through bombardier training, and he was a pretty sharp cookie. Going overseas, he took his white plush uniform with him, which we thought was kind of unnecessary. And the rest of the crew members were various degrees of quiet kids and wild kids. My tail gunner was a kind of a noisy beer drinking type, and he carried a beer can with him on one of the missions, and the beer can got shot into. And he said, "We got to land. I'm getting my tail wet." I said, "It's going to freeze if it's necessary. We're not going home." And the engineer was also one of the waist gunners on the bomb run normally, but the B-24 had problems of the nose wheel doors sticking and not opening, and we would have him get down on the catwalk in the bomb bay and kick the nose wheel doors with his feet to help him get over when it had hydraulic pressure. And he did that enough that we got him a distinguished flying cross board.
He went above and beyond the call of duty.
Right. And I can't think of any other particular things.
Did you get along with your crew?
We got along very well all together, and we went to reunions after that time. I remember a reunion at Charleston, South Carolina, when I went to the officers club and had them set up a meal for us for the whole crew, and I treated them all to a meal and the crew. And at that particular day, we had a complete crew together yet. And since that time, my co-pilot died of a heart attack, and the bombardier is still living in Louisiana someplace. I haven't talked to him in the last year or so. 3 or 4 of the other crew members died. The beer drinking trail gunner was one of them. And I don't know, the radio operator, Steve Buda, usually comes to these meetings, but he didn't come to this one this year. And he's the only one that's been coming to the reunions beside myself. And I think that kind of covers the crew.
Yeah. What can you tell us? Your first mission had a little bit of a crack up on the landing, but
Yeah.
How long did it take before you felt you and your crew were veteran?
Well, I didn't have any problem. One of our early missions, when we raised the nose gear on takeoff, the nose gear turned to one side and wouldn't come up through the nose gear door, and normally a crew would go back and land. And I said, "No, we ain't going to go back." I said, "Get one of the gun barrels out of the front turret, and we'll drop the nose gear, and when we come up, we'll use that as a crowbar to straighten it out." And we did that, and it came up and straightened out. And then the nose gunner said, "What do I do with the gun barrel?" I said, "You put it back in the gun." And you ride it up when you get home. So we had, at the start of every mission, we'd be on interphone, and I'd say the Lord's Prayer, and we'd say that together. And I think that calmed him down a little bit. But we didn't really have problems. Different times on different missions, if we got shot up pretty bad, they'd talk on the interphone to me, and I'd calm them down. I don't know any other. We never had any problems of any kind.
Did your age play into your younger guys looking up to you, and did you feel that pressure that they were counting on you to be that calm voice?
I don't know. I was 27 and a half, but I felt more comfortable than the 20-year-old pilots, I think, and because of the training I had before. And they didn't call me Pappy or anything. Later on in the Air Force, I stayed in for 25 years. I became a squadron commander of a couple of squadrons, and then I was known as Pappy.
That came later then.
Yeah, it came later.
Which, I guess, talking about the variety of missions, what missions were most difficult for you as a pilot?
On the, I think the 9th of August, we had the last mission to Ploesti. And as we made the bomb run, the prop giver #1 engine broke off, and the engine overspeeded, and it got up to high RPM, no way you could control it. And we dropped the bombs and turned and headed for home, and called Tuskegee to support us. So when the Red Tails came down and flew beside us, and about halfway home, the front end of the engine burned through, and the propeller came off, went over the wingtip, and the Tuskegee Airmen looked a little nervous. And the crew said, "Oh, we ought to land at Viz, which was in Yugoslavia, short of before you cross the Adriatic." And I says, "We've been for 3 hours on 3 engines. We can go another 2 hours." And so by the time we got home, we were, quote, missing in action, and they had stole all our stuff out of our tent and our bomb floors.
Was that a common occurrence then?
Common occurrence. When you flew in a mission and carried fragmentation bombs, the fragmentation bombs were enclosed in wooden boxes. And if you had a fragmentation, then you got the wooden boxes from those bombs for that day. And those wooden bombs went into making a floor for your tent. and these were kind of scarce. And if you were missing in action, well, those got stolen real quick. So you had to go back and round up your floor again.
Is there any hard feelings over that?
Oh, no, it was just a common occurrence.
You'd mentioned previously one of the Tuskegee Airmen coming down. Did they fly a lot of support missions?
They flew support missions on all of our missions.
What was your relationship with those pilots as far as
It was very good. And after the war, I went to Korea, and I was privileged to have a career in Tuskegee Air as my co-pilot.
So you got along
So
pretty well.
Buck and I flew 650 hours of combat together in Korea.
Mm-hmm.
So I had great respect for the Tuskegee Airmen.
Were your high-level missions more hazardous because of the flak, or were low levels more difficult?
Well, we only flew high-level missions at the time I was there, from July of 44 till we came home in April 45. And we were at a time period when there were very few fighters, but mostly flak. And the flak would be very heavy. And when we'd come home from a mission, we'd go around the airplane, look for the holes, and run a rifle cleaning rod through the holes to see where it went inside. And we count the holes that we penetrated in the airplane. And the most penetrations we had on one mission was 300. So we got pretty well flacked up on that mission. On one mission, a piece of flak was heading right from my pilot's seat, and we couldn't find it. In the middle of the night, I thought about my parachute and went out the next morning, and the parachute was on my back, had the piece of flak in the middle of it. So I was that close to a Purple Heart. But so I lucked out.
Now, did you have any crew members wounded by?
Just the
During-
navigator. Just the navigator. But we had close calls. We wore heated flying suits and heated shoes, and they tied their good shoes, their regular shoes, on their back in case they had to bail out. And on one of the missions, one of the gunners phoned up and said, "They shot the shoes off my back. What'll I do?" I said, "Don't worry about it. We'll figure that out if you land." and that and the hitting the beer can in the bomb bay, the tail gunner was the closest we got hit, actually. My bombardier wanted a Purple Heart, and the bomb and navigation area in the front of the airplane had a steel floor, and on each side of the floor was a ammunition box for 50 caliber ammunition for the nose gun, and in front of the thing was the bomb sight, which covered part of the window. So the bombardier and navigator on a bomb run, if they weren't lead ship, and we weren't lead ship most of the time, they would crouch down on the steel floor and put their flak suits over the top of their backs to protect them. And the bombardier would stick his foot out behind the steel, hoping something would come through and hit him. So he was a little fuzzy in the head. But that never happened.
Did you ever feel compelled to talk him out of that kind of activity?
I let him go.
No, when you're lead,
I'm not sure I knew about it all the time, really.
found out about it later, maybe?
Yeah.
Now, when you're lead plane, can you describe what your responsibilities were?
I never did fly lead plane. I flew number 2 position, which would then taking over in case the lead plane would go down. And on the mission, when my navigator was killed, I was in number 3 position, and number 1 and 2 both were shot down, and I was in the left wing, and we lost all our oxygen and hydraulics and all that, and the 7-ship formation was missing 2 airplanes then, and we just turned around and went back home with the rest of the group. Because we'd fly in 7-ship groups, one in behind the other, and there was a group in front of us. There was a group lead.
So you merged up with that group?
Yes, as when you got off the target, the 7-ship blocks would get together, and the group would have each squadron was 7 ships, so you had four bunches of them. They'd get together and fly home together.
That was for mutual protection,
Yes.
as far as against enemy fighters.
Yeah.
How often did you encounter fighter aircraft?
We only encountered fighters on one mission, and that wasn't close enough to us for the guys fired at it, but they were too far away. So we lucked out on the fire deal.
Did you ever talk to your gunners? Were they disappointed?
No, not really. When I lost that one engine, the propeller, we called in at Tuskegee Airmen, and the gunner started firing at him. We had to shut him down real quick. We said, "He's one of ours, don't shoot him."
How was that somewhat common as far as friendly fire occasionally happening?
Well, usually the Tuskegee boys weren't close enough to you. They were usually above you, unless they came in to to escort somebody home. And as we were escorting home on that mission at 10,000 feet, we're flying across Yugoslavia, and as we'd fly along, a mile ahead of us, there'd be one burst of flak go up. Just one burst, boom. So we'd fly around that and go on, and then we had that happen 4 or 5 times on that mission across Yugoslavia. So we figured that these guys were probably Yugoslavs that weren't too happy with the Germans in the first place, and were telling us to stay away from them, which was kind of interesting.
Yeah. You trained, you said briefly, when you were in the States with some French officers. And
Yes.
did you have any other, I guess, personal encounters with our allies, either British or French or Italian co-belligerents or anything along those lines?
After my missions were finished, I was asked to volunteer to go and work with the British Intelligence Agency. And we went to Pontevedra up near Pisa. I was the only person from my group, and I went up because of my engineering degree. And the British intelligence unit worked behind German lines, and their mission was to look at downed German aircraft to see if there was something new or what else was going on. And the unit consisted of 6 British officers and 6 American officers. And they were running out of American officers because the Germans would booby-trap their airplanes, and the American officers were getting booby-trapped. So we were replacements. And after 6 weeks of training with the English, they told us to go back home, that we'd be called for the mission we were going to do. And the mission was going to be to parachute into Germany and bring out a V-1 rocket engine for the Air Force to look at. We said, what? And they said, you know, you put it in a hay wagon with an oxen pulling it and you drag it out. We said, you gotta be kidding. They said, go home, we'll call you when the time comes. And a week later, they invaded Holland and found a trainload of them, so we didn't get called. So that was your story of don't volunteer.
It seems like a pretty sketchy plan to put it in a wagon.
Well, they were kind of joking about it. They said, you just got to get it out, bring it out. So it was interesting working with the British because they were quite a bunch of characters. And during our training, we were living with an Italian count and countess in Pontevedra, and the British were furnishing the food to them, and they were cooking the food for us. So each night at supper, we were, quote, in full dress with the English, eating supper, and 12 officers around the table, 6 British, 6 American, and they had glasses for each, wine glasses for each of us and all that sort of stuff. And I was a non-drinker at that time, and the English loved to sit down beside me because they could drink my glass of wine.
So you got along well with the British.
We got along well with the British. They were a bunch of characters.
Going back to a little bit to your pilot training,
Yeah.
was there something that maybe came back to you while you were flying your combat missions that you recalled from training that really came in handy?
I don't know. We were the first class. I graduated in 44A, in January 44. We were the first class in the Air Force to be trained in instrument flying. And we luckily didn't have to do much instrument flying in combat. We had one mission where as soon as we got off the ground in the 7-ship box, we got in the clouds. And I was number 4 ship, so I was right behind the number 1 ship in the squadron. So I just flew 10 feet behind him, and we broke out at 22,000 feet. And I didn't have to use my instrument training, but I had to used some pretty close flying training because it was hazy enough that you couldn't see the wingtips of your airplane. But I could just see that tail turret, and I knew I had to stay close to it. And as we broke out at 22,000 feet, there wasn't an airplane in sight anywhere. The rest of the airplanes of our 7-ship all went home.
You were by yourself?
The 2 of us were by ourselves.
Were you ever close to a mid-air collision at any point?
On one of the missions we had, we went into the target, and if you couldn't see the target, sometimes they'd come around, come back, and make another run at it. And on one of the missions of a bridge on the Brenner Pass that we were bombing, the 7-ship box in front of us didn't bomb, and they turned around and came right back through at the same elevation that we were. That particular day, I was number 7, 331, and as those 7 ships came to me, I dove down to get out of the way, and one of their airplanes took the antenna off of my airplane. So that was a, quote, mid-air collision, but luckily a survivable one.
Was that, your planes were doing roughly 240 or so miles an hour, maybe?
150.
150?
The propaganda about the high speed of that airplane is propaganda. We always flew missions at 155, and I don't recall ever flying over 200 at the most. But we always flew at 155 was in formation.
What else about the 24 could you tell us as far as it as a, the bomber and maybe some of the mythology surrounding it?
Well, each engine had 3 fuel tanks in the wing, so and they were bulletproof. Self-sealing fuel tanks, but they were connected with the little aluminum tubes at the bottom. And because of my experience, they give me all the crummy airplanes to fly just to try to find out what's wrong with them. So we had one airplane that one engine used 3 times as much gas as the other engines. So on the invasion of France, I was assigned to fly this airplane, and in order to save fuel, I'd feather that engine rather than burn up so much fuel, and every once in a while we'd crank it up so we could catch up. So when you cut that one down, you had to advance on the other 3 to stay up, and we'd run it half of the time. And on the way back, we landed in Rome to pick up gasoline because we were running low on fuel. And when I got home, I was missing action again. My floor was gone. and then when they got looking at that airplane, they found out that one of the little tubes between the tanks was plugged up. So 2 of the tanks weren't actually feeding the 3rd tank, and that 3rd tank was the one that had the gauge in it that said it was using 3 times as much fuel. So it wasn't really.
Yeah.
And
so you went to the process of feathering that engine and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And you didn't necessarily have to.
Well, we did it to save fuel, in order to have enough fuel to fly the mission. And then about September, October, I was transferred to group as group air inspector, and one of my main jobs there was to check each airplane that came back early to see if it was an airplane problem or a crew problem. And that was kind of interesting. And while I was flying at group, I'd fly my missions with the 512 Squadron, but I was assigned a group. And on one of the missions, they were bombing crossing of the river up in Italy. I don't know if it was the Po River. It wasn't the Po, but it was this side of the Po River. And they wanted all the airplanes you could probably get up there to bomb that. So we had, in group, we had a couple airplanes that were retired from combat that were used for training mechanics and stuff like that. And they said, Ross, we're going to let you fly one of these old airplanes and so we can get more bombs on the target. Said some of the equipment's taken out of it and the bombardier can't operate the thing, so we'll tie a rope to the salvo thing on the bombs and put the rope over your shoulder in the pilot's seat. And when the guy in front of you drops his bomb, you pull that rope and all your bombs will drop out. So we did that. So we'd fly these kind of crazy missions at times.
That sounds like a throwback to World War I.
Oh, we did all sorts of funny things. Then one of the 513th Squadron called our squadron one day and said that one of their crews was sick and could we furnish him a crew? And I had not been scheduled to fly that day, so they assigned our crew to fly that airplane. And so we flew the airplane to target and came back. And when we came back, their squadron was all lined up and said, we didn't think you'd get back. Said, nobody in our squadron will fly that junky airplane. And I said, well, if you'd fix all the stuff we got written down here, maybe they'd fly better.
So it sounds like your background as far as engineering and your schooling came into play,
right,
in addition to being a pilot.
Yeah. So I got stuck with these kind of jobs. And it was kind of interesting. And the crew chief always got unhappy with me because I always brought an airplane home always shot up. And if you got hit in the wings, to get to the fuel tanks, they had a million screws they had to unscrew off the top of those airplanes. And that was always a chore. And that put the airplane on the ground for a day or two to get the thing all done. And they'd say, Ross, don't bust up another one today.
So is this good-natured, or was your grounds
crew?
crew?
Yeah, it was good-natured, yeah.
And you and your grounds crew got along pretty well?
Yeah. And we never had the same ground crew. We never had the same airplane. In the 8th, they usually had the same airplane. We'd just be assigned any airplane that they'd have. And so we really didn't know the ground crews.
Yeah. Now, the B-24 is a 4-engine heavy bomber,
Right.
and you did strategic missions as far as the Ploesti raids and
Right.
probably other industrial targets.
Right.
What percentage, how many times did you fly in support of ground troops or interdiction strikes?
Well, when I dropped the bombs on that river, that was a ground crew army crossing the river. They wanted the thing filled. Then the invasion of southern France, when I flew with the engine feathered half the time, that was, I guess, in support of that. Then on the Brenner, as the Germans were moving out of Italy to the north in late '44, they had to go up to the Brenner Pass. And our missions then were knocking out bridges on the Brenner Pass, because the Germans would have trains going up the Brenner Pass, and when they got to Brown Belt Bridge, they had enough GIs on leave in the air to take the equipment across around the bridge up to the next one. And so we kept bombing those bridges. And we bombed marshalling yards, and Ploesti was oil fields. And that was mostly what the missions were.
Did you prefer one over the other, or was it all just a job?
Didn't make any difference. It didn't make any difference. They had flak on all of them.
Yeah.
They had more, as the war drove on, they had more and more flak guns on the targets. And you were flying into a black cloud of just busting targets. And as we flew more and more missions, your helmet would come down more and more and more, so you you only see the ones right in front of you.
What you can't see can't get you, maybe.
Right.
How did the war end for you? What were you doing, and what was your feeling at the time?
Well, we came home in April of 42, April of 45, and to redeploy to the South Pacific. And during our 30-day leave at home, during May, the German war went down the drain, and they decided not to have our group go to the South Pacific. So they spread us out. And I was sent to Colorado Springs to the IG office, the Inspector General's office. And our mission for the next 4 years was closing up bases in the western half of the United States, and which was kind of interesting. We'd have 2 days or 2 weeks at home and 2 weeks out in the field, closing up bases.
Were you involved in any of the, I guess, for want of a better term, the mothballing of excess aircraft?
No, I never got involved in that. I don't know how. I don't even know how that was done. Or I guess the one that flew home just flew on out to Davis Mountain and mothballed them. I've been out through there and seen this situation out there.
The old boneyards?
Yeah.
And you stayed in the Air Force.
I stayed for 25 years. As the war was over, the aircraft industry kind of went down the tube, so I didn't see any point in going back to the Air Force. So I stayed in, and I was a captain at the time. And in 1949, I was sent to Okinawa to get ready for Korea, but we didn't know that. and so I was in the IG over there, and Okinawa was invaded in 45 Easter Day, and a typhoon hit, and they unloaded all the ships on land and just dumped the stuff in piles. And we were sorting these piles of stuff to see what was usable and what wasn't. And we had about a dozen armament officers with us, and their job was to check the bombs that were stored on Aishima Island. There were thousands of 500-pound bombs there, and they unscrewed the nose and tail of each one of them. And if they were dripping, they'd dump them in the sea. If they were good, they'd put them back together again and restack them. And
sounds like hazardous work.
Yeah, and I was working with the 20th Air Force General. I was a flying safety officer, and I guess I shouldn't say his name on this program, but he was referred to as a crazy general, and he had funny ideas. And each aircraft accident we have to go and tell the general about the accident and write it up. And I started getting not taking this too seriously, and my boss said one day that, "I think the general don't think you're too serious about this." And I said, "Maybe I should get out of this." And this is about just when Korea opened up. So they took all the C-46s from the bases on the Pacific area and flew them all to Japan to set up the first provisional troop carrier group. And I jumped aboard one of those airplanes and went to Japan.
So you went from bombers to troop transport?
To troop transport.
And did you remain in troop transport throughout the Korean War?
Right. And that's when Buck Newsom, my Tuskegee Airman, my co-pilot, flew missions. And we flew first out of Tachikawa to Japan, or to Korea. And our first mission into Korea was waking us up at 4 o'clock in the morning and says, your airplanes are loaded, you're on your way. And but before that, we were practicing for formation flying for dropping paratroopers. But so we ended up hauling supplies real quick. And the Chinese were coming pretty far south then. And then as they started pushing the north, we started carrying supplies and units farther and farther north. And when the Chinese hit the reservoir, we'd pick up wounded and bring them back like the MASH things on TV and drop them off there, and then pick up their guys that had been there for a day or two and take them down to the next hospital. And each hospital would put them in a little better shape. And we do this hop, hop, hop all the way back to Japan, which was kind of interesting. But they were very short of flight nurses, and the flight nurses flew every day, and we flew every other day. And we'd fly from about 5 o'clock in the morning to 11 o'clock at night. And on the way to Korea in the morning, in the daytime, the flight nurses would sleep in the litters to catch up on sleep, hopefully. And if you didn't have flight nurses on the trip, sometime you had a GI technician type, and then the crew, the pilot and the co-pilot, would help load litters on the airplane. And that got to be pretty tricky. The litters were 3 high, and we found out real quick to lift up and hook that thing up, you check a guy's weight first. And the little skinny guys went on the top, and the fat guys went on the bottom. And on one day, I helped load 90 litters, and we had 18 per airplane. You go down the first station and offload, and then you pick up another bunch and take them in. And then that was kind of interesting.
Well, as we wrap up, Ross,
Yeah.
is there anything that you'd like to conclude with?
No, I think I've told you the whole story.
Well, it's a good story, and hopefully, you've enjoyed this time and you'll enjoy your weekend here.
Yep.
I thank you for your service to our country.
Okay,
Thank you, Ross.
thank you.